Arthur Conan Doyle. Basically, he is a Scottish writer and a physician and was born on May 22, 1859 in Edinburgh to a wealthy Irish Catholic family. Since his childhood, he got exposed to a wide range of literature owing to his mother's passion for books and her gift of storytelling. In fact, in his book entitled Sherlock Holmes, he acknowledged his mother, where he stated that in my early childhood, as far as I can remember, anything at all the vivid stories she would tell me stand out so clearly that they obscure the real facts of my life. After graduating from Stonyhurst College, the young Doyle decided to follow a medical career and entered the University of Edinburgh. However, he was inspired by some of the writers such as Sir Walter Scott and Edgar Allan Poe, with the old conventions and with his fictional books. He got married to Louise Hawkins and has two children. Years after, though he had practiced his medical career, he was able to publish several books, and one of which is his Sherlock Holmes, which became his most famous literary creation. This book figured out a dichotomy that accomplishment told for all his life as he felt that the character was taking him away from the movie seriously forms of writing to which he wanted to devote his career.
Before discussing to you its genre, let me first tell you what the Red-Headed League is all about. The case started when Jabez Wilson, a London pawnbroker, comes to consult Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. While studying his client, both Holmes and Watson notice his red hair, which has a distinct flame-like hue. Wilson tells them that some weeks before his young assistant Vincent Spaulding urged him to respond to a newspaper offering work to only red-headed male applicants. The next morning, Wilson had waited in a long line of fellow red-headed men. He was interviewed and was the only applicant hired because none of the other applicants qualified. Their red hair was either too dark or too bright and did not match Wilson's unique flame color. Wilson tells Holmes that his business has been struggling. Since his pawn shop did most of its business in the evenings, he was able to vacate his shop for short periods in the afternoon, receiving $4 a week for several weeks. The work was obviously useless clerical work in a bare office, only performed for nominal compliance with the will, whereupon he was made to copy the Encyclopedia Britannica. Wilson learned much about the subject starting with the A version and looked forward to getting into the B section. One morning, a sign on the locked office door inexplicably announced that the Red-Headed League is dissolved. Wilson went to the landlord, who said that he had never heard of Duncan Ross, the person who managed the league office. The landlord did remember the tenant with scarlet hair and gives him a red card which directs Wilson to an artificial knee company. Wilson ends the story with how frustrated he is losing the $4 a week. Holmes and Watson laugh at Wilson because of the ridiculous situation, but Holmes assures him that by Monday they will solve the case. Wilson leaves after having given the detective a description of Spaulding. Holmes decides to go and see Spaulding when Holmes notices his dirty trouser knees. Holmes then taps on the pavement in front of the pawnbroker shop. With the case solved, he calls Police Inspector Jones and Mr. Merriweather, a director of the bank located next door. The four hide themselves in the bank vault and confront the thieves when they show up. They are John Clay, who has a long history of criminal activity already, and his helper Archie. Under the alias of Spaulding and Ross, they had contrived the Red-Headed League rigmarole to keep Wilson out of his shop while they dug in the basement, in order to break into the bank vault next door. Although paying Jabez Wilson £4 a week was expensive, it was a pittance compared to the ill-gotten thousands they were looking to steal from the bank. Back at Baker Street, Holmes explains to Watson how he solved the case. In the Red-Headed League, Holmes is engaged upon two seemingly unrelated cases, a daring bank robbery and the disappearance of a pawnbroker's assistant. Using minute details of the small mystery, he is able to solve the larger one. Depend upon it, says Holmes to Watson in a case of identity. There is nothing so unnatural as the commonplace. Holmes is as fascinated by the story of a common young woman whose groom has vanished on the way to the altar as he has been by the woos of kings. He sharpens his powers of detection by putting together scattered facts to form a powerful and unexpected accusation. Holmes tells Watson about one of his first cases, the Musgrave ritual, one that helped him make famous. Two servants of an English nobleman disappear. By following a trail of obscure clues left behind in an old parchment, Holmes discovers the crown of a former king of England. So the Red-Headed League obviously belongs to a genre of detective fiction, in which a detective works to solve a specific crime or mystery. By the last 15 years of Victoria's reign, Detective fiction had become established as a genre in its own right. Although the publication of detective novels did not dwindle in the final decade of the 19th century, modern studies of the genre tend to identify this period as the golden age of the short story of detection. Doyle's contribution to detective fiction is well known, and the Holmes formula was initiated by other contributors. There are 2 points to consider when talking about Victorian detective fiction. Firstly, that the detective story as a distinct genre is a product of the 19th century, and secondly, that only a small amount of the detective fiction produced at the time is still read and studied. For most people, Victorian detective fiction is constituted by the Sherlock Holmes stories, despite the fact that a number of these stories were written into the 20th century, and perhaps the trio of the Dublin Tales written by Edgar Allan Poe in the 1840s. Some readers may also be aware of the detective story's generic cousin, the cessation novel, and in particular the contribution of Wilkie Collins to the genre. Yet few are aware of the great body of work marking the transitional phase from the initial success of the detective story to the height of Poe's popularity in the early 20th century.
So, hi everyone. Today I will be bringing you my report, which is the era of Sherlock Holmes. So, Sherlock Holmes was written by Arthur Conan Doyle for over a 40-year period that spanned three distinct eras in the British life: the Victorian, the Georgian, and the Edwardian. In Holmes' stories, however, it is always the late Victorian era that is mirrored in the story. Holmes himself so completely embodies the values of this era. In fact, he is regarded as the perfect hero for his age. So, during this time in the Victorian era, a man who believed in reason above all, Holmes was ideal for his time, a time in which science challenged the long held beliefs and status quo was written by social economic changes. So, in the book of Charles Darwin, The Origins of Species, which was written in the year 1859, it changed the Western world by calling into question the biblical belief of creationism, and its place during the mysteries of physical world could be explained by science. So the people believed during this time in the Victorian era that everything that is happening around us can be explained by science, and we can see that in um, Holmes stories. So it was also an era of dizzying technological advance. So for over 20 years span, 20 years span in the Victorian era, between 1867 to 1887 alone, the typewriter, the telephone, the gramophone, the telegraph, the electric bulb, and the internal combustion engine was were all invented. So, as a critic said in his study, through the character of Holmes, Doyle brilliantly popularized the century's confidence in the uniform operation of scientific laws that allowed the trained observer to deduce the effects the causes from effects rather. So just as paleontologists could identify an organism from fossil fragments, and so Holmes could reconstruct a crime by tracing physical clues and parsing together their meaning. Indeed, as we can remember in the story, Holmes was very much attached to the reasons and science, and you can see Holmes in the libraries doing some, not libraries, in um, the laboratories doing some investigation about the thing that he has found in the crime crime scene. And then scientific rationalism was the order of the day during the Victorian era, and Holmes and Sherlock Holmes acted as its standard bearer. And but Holmes' role as the consummate Victorian gentleman was equally important in making him a hero. Among the enormous changes brought by the Industrial Revolution was an expanding middle class with a growing concern about its place in the society. So the cliche of the detective novel, the butler did it, arose from a real upper and middle class fear that those under them would rise up in revolt. So Holmes offered readers reassurance about traditional English values especially useful at a time when England was beginning to feel uncertainty about its place in the world. Each crime that Sherlock Holmes resolved, the social the social order is restored and proper planned values are reaffirmed. The quintessential illustration of this may be the moment in the novel when he reveals himself to Watson after he has lived for days in a primitive hut on the moors. Yet, as we can see in the novel, yet his chin was as smooth and his linen as perfect as if he were in Becker Street. So in the film, this same sentiment is expressed when Watson pulls Holmes out of the grim man mire using his well-tailored suit jacket. So three cheers for Sabalok, who says Riley afterward. There are no problems, he seems to indicate, that can't be resolved with a combination of keen reasoning, bravery, and civilized manners, as he does for Sir Henry Maxwell when he reads him of the family curse and returns him naturally in his manner. Holmes reassured his audience that all was right with their world. Um, and although Sherlock Holmes gradually evolves from a cold reasoning machine to someone more human, he always remains intellectually far superior than any other ordinary man. So eccentric but elegant, brilliant but frequently bored, Holmes injects himself Holmes injects himself with drugs, the legal then because, as he said, the sign of four. I abhor the dull routine of existence. So Holmes was merely into reason and into investigating everything that he he observes. And then there is nothing more stimulating than a case where everything goes against you. So we can see this in one of the lines of Sherlock Holmes. And then in the stories, as in this film, Watson, the solid middle class British citizen, disapproves of Holmes' drug use. As Holmes became a more developed character with each story, so Conan Doyle decided to gradually drop Sherlock Holmes' use of drugs. So that's it. So Sherlock Holmes, the claim for this analysis A is that Sherlock Holmes embodies the real hero during the Victorian era because he is into reasoning and observing and having the notion of everything that can be explained by science.
Hello everyone, I am tasked to provide you with the analysis B, or the universal theme for the story The Red-Headed Leaf by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And our group believes that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The Red-Headed Leaf effectively shows man's innate curiosity for what is bizarre or the things that are bizarre, and man's constant quest for truth, knowledge, and justice. So, why do we say this? There are actually several reasons why we believe this to be so. The first one being the setting coupled with the general storyline of the case. In The Red-Headed Leaf, Doyle created a world that is realistic, but is one that is peppered with seemingly inexplicable occurrences. It is a world that made it possible for normal or everyday things to intermix with those that are bizarre. This is even more emphasized with a quote from Sherlock Holmes himself, who said that as a rule, the more bizarre a thing is, the less mysterious it proves to be. It is your commonplace, featureless crimes which are really puzzling, just as a commonplace face is the most difficult to identify. And he is right actually in one way. Indeed, there is a connection between the bizarre and the mundane. Anyone reading about the initial facts on the case would surely concoct a very complicated explanation about it. But when the case was solved and everything has been revealed, we clearly could see that things are actually simple and not as complex as we thought them to be. Another reason for our claim would also be supported by another line, this time said by Sherlock Holmes' friend Dr. Watson. He said that here I had heard what he had heard, I had seen what he had seen, and yet from his words it was evident that he saw clearly not only what had happened, but what was about to happen, while to me the whole business was still confused and grotesque. This line was uttered by Sherlock Holmes' friend, Dr. John Watson, um, and that was his response of awe or of disbelief as Sherlock Holmes was able to ascertain what kind of person or what past this their new client named his new client rather named Jabez Wilson had just by staying with him and talking to him for a few minutes. He was able to correctly guess that Jabez Wilson had been to China and that he used to do manual labor just and that he also does some writing um, on his time on his free time just by staying with him for a few minutes. So this is also this would show that um, man usually has this eagerness to to solve the things or to solve the riddle of things that sometimes we set aside the obvious reasons that are just staring at our faces. Because right after that, Sherlock Holmes was able to explain how he correctly guessed that Jabez Wilson came from China, and that's because of that necklace with the pendant that he was wearing and all those things. And all of those evidences, all of those things that provided him with the conclusion that he gave to Jabez Wilson are actually just in front of them. And these are things that the three of them, in fact, just took for granted because they were more inclined on finding out things the harder way. And that is, in fact, one of the nature of men, that we actually complicate a lot of things unnecessarily. So, also, the person of Sherlock Holmes himself is an embodiment of the human being who uses his logic and reasoning to his fullest potential. As we can see in solving his cases, most especially to this one, to the Red-Headed League, Sherlock Holmes made use of his keen observation about things and of his high IQ, of course, in order for him to solve the case. Also, Dr. Watson may seem to be a person who is equipped with a lower level of intelligence compared with Sherlock Holmes, and we can pretty much safely say that he serves as a mirror of of us, the readers of the story, since oftentimes he is as baffled as the reader is on why Sherlock Holmes was able to get answers or would be able to solve the case as good as he does. So he narrates the story according to his perception, but what makes him helpful in our defense for our claim is that he also shares an ordinary being's interest on the things that are not so common as with the case, and he also has this similar desire to solve the mystery, and he also shows a keen interest and a sense of willingness in assisting Holmes solve the case. In conclusion, we can safely say that both Sherlock Holmes as well as his friend Dr. Watson clearly shows or clearly presents man's constant search or apparent hunger for knowledge as well as of justice. Um, with their innate curiosity about the things that are bizarre, as well as with their interest to solve things that do not appear to be commonplace, they were able to resolve the case, which isn't actually, although not as complicated as the readers would initially think, is in fact one that is of a bigger magnitude than um, all of them in the story first think that it would be. Considering that at first they only thought that the Red-Headed League was just a joke made out for Jabez Wilson. And in the end, it appears that Sherlock Holmes was able to solve what may have been the most daring bank robbery during their time.